The atmospheric processor hummed its usual off-key lullaby as Jake Sullivan wiped crystalline dust from his visor for the 100th time that day. Kepler 442c had many charming qualities: breathable air, decent gravity, and scenery that would make any tourism board weep with joy. But its habit of raining microscopic glass particles every few hours was not among them. "Another successful day in paradise," he muttered, sealing the last soil sample container with perhaps more force than necessary. The bio readings were fascinating, sure, but fascinating didn't make the lonely evenings any shorter or the synthetic coffee taste any less like recycled boot leather. His mobile research station squatted in a clearing like a metallic mushroom, all curves and efficiency. 3 months into his 18-month assignment, Jake had developed a comfortable routine. Work until the twin suns set, heat up something allegedly edible, file his reports, and pretend the sound of wind through the singing crystals didn't remind him of voices from home. Tonight felt different, though he couldn't pinpoint why. Maybe it was the way the bioluminescent moss seemed brighter, or how the crystal formations hummed in harmonies that made his teeth itch. He'd learned to trust his instincts on this alien world. They'd kept him alive through 3 glass storms and one very embarrassing incident involving what he'd thought was a friendly local flower, but turned out to be something with teeth. The portable heater cast a warm orange glow as Jake settled onto his cot with his evening meal. The package claimed it was hearty beef stew, but he suspected the manufacturers had a very loose definition of both hearty and beef. Still, it was hot and contained actual vegetables from the hydroponic garden, which made it practically gourmet by frontier standards. He was halfway through composing his daily report when movement caught his eye. Something pale shifted between the crystal outcroppings about 50 meters from camp. Jake reached for his scanner, habits from xenobiology training kicking in automatically. The readings made him frown. Definitely organic, definitely large enough to be concerning, but the energy signature was strange. "Please don't be another one of those 6-legged disco bears," he muttered, remembering his first week's encounter with the planet's most enthusiastically territorial wildlife. "I'm still finding glitter in my equipment." The figure stumbled into his camp's perimeter lighting and Jake's breath caught. Not a disco bear. Definitely, absolutely not a disco bear. She looked human at first glance. 2 arms, 2 legs, proportioned like any woman he might have met back on Earth. But the ears gave her away immediately, elongated and pointed, catching the light like delicate shells. Her clothing shimmered with an inner radiance that seemed to pulse with her breathing, and her skin held a faint luminescence that reminded him of the planet's native crystals. She collapsed near his supply crates, unconscious or close to it. Jake's training screamed at him to activate the emergency beacon, to follow first contact protocols, to document everything. Instead, he found himself kneeling beside her, checking for obvious injuries like he would for any human in distress. Her pulse felt steady under his fingertips, though her skin was surprisingly cool. "Okay, so this is happening," he said aloud, partly to the unconscious alien woman and partly to convince himself this wasn't another one of his increasingly vivid dreams. "Let's get you somewhere warm before you become a popsicle." Moving her carefully to his shelter, Jake activated the medical scanner built into his emergency kit. The readings were fascinating and completely useless. Her biology was similar enough to human that the scanner recognized life signs, but different enough that it couldn't tell him much beyond. "Yep, she's alive." Her eyes fluttered open as he adjusted the heater's output. They were large and dark, with an inner light that seemed to shift like aurora. She tried to sit up, speaking in a language that sounded like crystal chimes mixed with distant thunder. Musical but urgent. "Easy there," Jake said, holding up his hands in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. "You're safe. I'm Jake. Human. Friendly human. I come in peace and all that." She tilted her head, studying him with obvious intelligence. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, questioning. Jake activated his universal translator, hoping the basic Model Earth command had provided would be up to the challenge. Gratitude, warmth, danger. The device managed to parse a few words, but the context remained frustratingly unclear. "Well, that's better than nothing," Jake said, offering her his water bottle. "At least we established gratitude, which suggests you're not planning to eat me. Always a good sign in first contact situations." She accepted the water cautiously, sniffing it first before taking a small sip. Her expression shifted to surprise, then something that might have been amusement. She spoke again, and this time the translator caught more. "Water, strange but good, you are kind." "Kind is my middle name," Jake replied. "Well, actually it's Theodore, but kind sounds better. Are you hurt? In danger? Do I need to hide you from something with big teeth and poor impulse control?" Her laugh was like wind chimes, soft and musical. She seemed to understand more than she could express, nodding at his questions while struggling with words the translator could process. Through gestures and broken phrases, she managed to convey that she was fleeing something, that she was tired, and that she was grateful for his help. "Running from something, got it," Jake said, unconsciously falling into the habit of talking that had kept him company during long months alone. "Well, my security system isn't much against anything bigger than an angry squirrel, but you're welcome to stay until you figure out your next move." As if to punctuate his words, one of the planet's nocturnal creatures chose that moment to test his perimeter alarms with what sounded like a combination of opera singer and construction equipment. The alien woman, he really needed to learn her name, flinched at the sound. "Don't worry about the noise," Jake assured her. "That's just a moaning crystal slug. They're actually quite harmless, just incredibly dramatic about everything. Kind of like my ex-girlfriend's cat." She looked puzzled by the reference but seemed reassured by his calm tone. The translator was getting better at parsing her speech patterns, and she managed to communicate that she needed rest, that she felt safe here. Safe? The word carried weight in her voice that the universal translator couldn't quite capture. Jake set up his spare blanket on the other side of the heater, but she seemed reluctant to move that far from him. After a moment's hesitation, she settled onto the floor beside his cot, close enough that he could feel the faint warmth radiating from her luminescent skin. "Comfortable?" he asked. She nodded, already looking drowsy in the heater's glow. As her breathing deepened into sleep, Jake found himself studying her features in the soft light. The pointed ears weren't her only alien trait. Her hair held the same inner radiance as her skin, and patterns of light seemed to dance beneath her closed eyelids like dreams made visible. Tomorrow he'd have to figure out what to do about her. Tonight, though, he was content to listen to the dual rhythm of her breathing and the distant crystal songs, wondering what twist of fate had brought an exhausted alien princess to his doorstep. Because if she wasn't royalty of some kind, he'd eat his remaining supply of synthetic coffee. And considering how terrible it tasted, that was saying something. Jake woke to the smell of ozone and the distinct absence of mysterious alien women. He sat up, blinking in the pale morning light filtering through his shelter's translucent walls, half convinced he'd dreamed the entire encounter. The spot where she'd slept showed no evidence of occupation except for a faint shimmer in the air, like heat waves on a summer day. "Well, that was either the best dream I've had in months or the weirdest Tuesday of my career," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "Probably shouldn't mention this in my reports unless I want a one-way ticket to the Psych Evaluation Center." His equipment table held a surprise, though, a small crystalline token, no bigger than his thumb, that pulsed with soft blue light. It hadn't been there yesterday, and unless his coffee maker had developed artistic ambitions overnight, his mysterious visitor had left it behind. A thank-you gift or a tracking device. Jake picked up the crystal, turning it over in his palm. With my luck, probably both. The scanner identified it as some sort of bio-integrated technology, but beyond confirming it wasn't radioactive or explosive, the readings meant nothing. Jake clipped it to his utility belt, figuring that if it was meant to kill him, there were probably easier ways to accomplish that goal. His daily routine proceeded normally: atmospheric readings, soil samples, and a fascinating discovery about how the local fungi seemed to network through crystalline root systems. By afternoon, Jake had almost convinced himself the previous night was a hallucination brought on by too much exposure to xenobotanical spores. "Note to self," he said while calibrating his spectrometer. "Next supply drop, request better air filters. And maybe some books. Talking to yourself is fine, but when you start answering back with different voices, that's when family worry." The glass rain started around 3, forcing him inside to process samples and update his geological surveys. Kepler 442c's weather patterns followed a rigid schedule that would make Swiss trains jealous. Glass storms every 6 hours, bioluminescent fog at dawn and dusk, and crystal singing that peaked during both moonrises. Jake was cataloging mineral compositions when his motion sensors chimed. The display showed the same energy signature from the previous night, approaching his camp with deliberate purpose rather than desperate flight. "Okay, so either I'm having a very consistent mental breakdown, or last night actually happened," Jake said, saving his work and checking that his universal translator was fully charged. Time to find out which. She emerged from the crystal grove like she belonged there, moving with fluid grace between the singing formations. In daylight, her alien nature was more obvious. The luminescent patterns beneath her skin shifted like living tattoos, and her hair seemed to catch and hold light from sources that didn't exist. "Jake," she said, his name sounding like music in her voice. The translator had apparently been busy during her absence, because her words came through much clearer than before. "I return as promised." "Promised? I must have missed that part of our conversation," Jake replied, though he was smiling. "Not complaining, mind you. Company's rare out here, especially company that doesn't try to eat my equipment." She tilted her head in that curious gesture he'd noticed before. "You speak to machines often." "More than I probably should," Jake admitted. "Turns out conversation is a basic human need, even if it's one-sided. My atmospheric processor here knows more about my childhood than most of my family." "Your family is far." "Several star systems far. Standard terraforming contract, 18 months minimum deployment." Jake gestured to his camp. "Hence the talking to machines. It beats talking to myself, though I do that too." Her expression shifted to something that might have been sympathy. "Loneliness is universal." "Unfortunately, yes. Though I'm guessing you didn't walk through whatever passes for wilderness around here just to discuss my social problems." Jake activated his camp's hospitality protocols, such as they were. "Hungry. I've got ration packs that claim to be food, and coffee that's definitely lying about being coffee." "Coffee. Bitter brown liquid that humans consume to maintain the illusion of consciousness. It's an acquired taste." Jake held up his mug. "This particular version was acquired from the lowest bidder, so proceed with caution." She accepted a cup, inhaling the aroma with obvious curiosity before taking a careful sip. Her reaction was immediate and dramatic, eyes widening, a sharp intake of breath, followed by what sounded like either choking or laughing. "Strong," she managed. "That's one word for it. Weaponizable is another." Jake took a sip of his own cup, making an involuntary face. "I keep telling myself it builds character." "Character? Strength through suffering. A human concept that probably sounds insane to anyone with functioning taste buds." This time her laugh was definitely a laugh, crystal clear and infectious. "Your species embraces suffering for improvement. We're weird that way. We pay money to run long distances, climb mountains that actively try to kill us, and eat spicy food that makes us cry." Jake grinned. "Speaking of weird, I never got your name last night, unless your people don't do names." "Names are," she paused, searching for words the translator could handle. "Complex, I am called." The translator made several unpleasant noises before settling on Starweaver. Starweaver, that's beautiful. Jake tested the name, liking how it felt. Much more poetic than Jake, which means guy who holds things in ancient languages nobody uses anymore. You hold things. Metaphorically. I hold this outpost together, hold my sanity together on good days, hold conversations with my equipment when the isolation gets too intense. Jake gestured around his camp. Though judging by recent events, I might be losing that last battle. Starweaver stood, moving to examine his atmospheric processor with obvious interest. Her fingers traced the machine's surface, and Jake could swear the humming grew more musical. Your machine sings. All machines sing if you listen long enough. Usually it means something's wrong, though. Jake joined her beside the processor. This one's just processing the local atmosphere, making sure it stays breathable for humans. You change the air. Just clean it up a little, filter out the glass particles, adjust the oxygen content, that sort of thing. Jake caught her expression. Is that bad? Are we disrupting something? No, not bad, interesting. Starweaver placed her palm flat against the processor, and the humming shifted to a definitely more pleasant frequency. Your people work with air, mine with crystal. Similar. Purpose. Environmental engineering, Jake nodded. What do you do with crystals? Instead of answering directly, Starweaver moved to the nearest crystal formation. She placed both hands on its surface, and the entire grove began to resonate with harmonious tones that seemed to respond to her touch. Communication, she said simply. Warning, music, memory storage. Memory storage, like a computer. Computer. Jake pulled out his tablet, showing her the display. Electronic brain. Stores information, processes data, occasionally crashes at the worst possible moment. Starweaver studied the device with fascination. Similar, yes, but crystals grow memory, not store. Each song is experience, passed from one to many. A biological internet made of singing rocks, Jake mused. That's actually brilliant. No server maintenance, no network outages, and probably better customer service than Earth's major providers. Customer service? Never mind. Human joke about how our technology hates us. Jake saved his work on the tablet. So you're what, a crystal network technician? Keeper, guardian, teacher. Starweaver's expression grew more serious. Was keeper. Was. Past tense doesn't sound good in any language. My people disagree with my methods. I speak with surface dwellers. She gestured toward Jake. This is forbidden. Forbidden fraternization with the locals. Jake nodded. Yeah, my bosses wouldn't be thrilled about this conversation either. First contact protocols exist for good reasons, but they also exist for really stupid bureaucratic reasons. You risk punishment. Probably, but good conversation is worth a little career turbulence. Jake met her gaze. Besides, you seem harmless enough. No tentacles, no apparent desire to harvest my organs, and you laugh at my terrible jokes. That's practically a diplomatic success. The twin suns were setting, painting the crystal formations in shades of amber and rose. Starweaver moved toward the spot where she'd slept the previous night, settling onto the ground with obvious familiarity. You're staying again. If permitted, surface nights are difficult alone. Cold. Lonely, she said simply. Jake understood that feeling better than most. Well then, welcome back to Jake's totally unauthorized interspecies bed and breakfast. The accommodations are terrible, but the company's improving. 3 weeks into what Jake had privately dubbed the weirdest routine of his career, Starweaver's nightly visits had become as predictable as Kepler 442c's glass storms. She arrived each evening just as he finished calibrating his equipment, bringing with her stories of underground crystal cities and political intrigue that made his terraforming reports seem painfully boring by comparison. So let me get this straight, Jake said, adjusting the portable heater between them. Your cousin thinks you're corrupting yourself by talking to surface dwellers, but he's the one who tried to marry his way into 3 different royal houses simultaneously. 4 houses, Starweaver corrected, her expression serious despite the absurdity. The fourth was my sister. Okay, that's definitely crossing some lines, even by interplanetary standards. Jake shook his head. And this guy wants— I got it. Though I'm filing away humans of all species for future philosophical discussions. Jake handed her a cup of his evening tea, a vast improvement over the coffee, though that wasn't saying much. What's your sister's take on all this? She supports my exile, says I bring shame to family traditions. Starweaver's luminescent patterns dimmed slightly. Perhaps she is correct. Or perhaps, Jake said, pulling out his tablet, family traditions sometimes need updating. Look at this. He'd been working on something for days. A simple program that could translate the harmonic patterns of the local crystals into visual displays. When he activated it near one of the singing formations, the screen filled with swirling colors that pulsed in rhythm with the crystal's song. Starweaver gasped, nearly dropping her tea. You can see the songs. Basic harmonic analysis married to visual processing. Nothing fancy, but— Jake stopped as Starweaver placed her palm on his tablet. The display exploded with complexity, showing layers of meaning he hadn't known existed. Your people's technology and our crystal song together, she breathed. This is what I have been trying to show them. What that two different approaches can work better together than separately. Shocking concept. Jake saved the program, grinning. Though I have to admit, this is way cooler than my usual work. Most days I'm just making sure the air doesn't kill me. Air that sparkles with glass dust and organic compounds your scanner cannot identify, Starweaver pointed out. You work in beauty and call it mundane. When you put it that way, I sound pretty ungrateful. Jake looked around his camp with new eyes. Though in my defense, beauty that can slice your lungs open requires a certain level of respect. All beauty requires respect. This is why. Starweaver paused, switching to her musical language for a moment before the translator caught up. This is why I believe surface dwellers and luminari should learn together. The luminari. That's your people. Light workers, crystal singers, underground dwellers who fear the surface because we have forgotten how to adapt. Starweaver's patterns flared brighter with obvious frustration. My cousin preaches purity of tradition, but tradition without growth is just elaborate death. Harsh words for a princess in exile. Former princess, she corrected. Current refugee, who imposes on kind terraformers' hospitality. Current friend who brightens up an otherwise tedious assignment, Jake corrected right back. Besides, tomorrow's supply drop includes actual chocolate from Earth. If that doesn't prove the value of interplanetary cooperation, nothing will. Chocolate. Cocoa beans processed into bars of pure happiness. It's humanity's greatest contribution to galactic culture, unless you count jazz music or unnecessarily complicated coffee drinks. Jake made a note on his tablet. Fair warning, it's addictive and may cause humans to make poor decisions. More poor decisions than befriending exiled aliens. Hey, I'll have you know that's turning out to be one of my better life choices. Jake noticed she'd finished her tea and was looking drowsy. Speaking of which, are you sure sleeping on my floor is comfortable? I could requisition better bedding from the next supply run. Comfort is not the purpose, Starweaver said, settling into her usual spot beside his cot. Safety is, peace is. Peace. Underground, always listening for enemies, always watching for betrayal. Here. She gestured around the simple camp. Here you talk to machines and laugh at your own jokes and worry about air quality. Simple worries, honest worries. I never thought of my neuroses as therapeutic, but I'll take it. Jake dimmed the lights, leaving just the heater's glow. Though talking to machines isn't entirely crazy, they're better listeners than most people. Most people talk too much, listen too little, Starweaver agreed sleepily. You talk right amount. High praise from someone whose people communicate through singing crystals. That's got to be the most efficient information transfer system in the galaxy. Efficient, yes, but cannot share feelings like human words. Cannot make jokes about coffee or explain chocolate. Her patterns were fading as sleep approached. "Your words carry warmth." Jake felt an odd flutter in his chest at that admission. Over the past weeks, he'd grown genuinely fond of Starweaver's company, looking forward to their evening conversations more than he cared to analyze. Her perspective on everything from human technology to galactic politics was refreshing, and her laugh had become the highlight of his day. "Starweaver," he said quietly, "whatever your cousin's issues are, your people are lucky to have you, even if they're too stubborn to realize it." Her response was barely audible, already half-dream. "Lucky to have you too, Jake, who holds things together." As her breathing deepened into the steady rhythm of sleep, Jake found himself studying her peaceful expression in the heater's glow. The luminescent patterns beneath her skin pulsed gently, like a slow heartbeat made visible. He'd started timing his daily reports around her arrival, organizing his work schedule to ensure he'd be free when she appeared each evening. When had that happened? When had a routine built around an alien refugee become more important than his official duties? His tablet chimed softly, a message from Earth Command requesting his monthly psychological evaluation. Standard procedure for isolated assignments, but Jake found himself hesitating before opening the form. How exactly was he supposed to explain that his mental health had never been better, thanks to nightly visits from an exiled alien princess? Question 1. Have you experienced any unusual stress or anxiety? Jake read aloud in a whisper. Define unusual. Does worrying about interplanetary political implications count? Starweaver stirred slightly at the sound of his voice, unconsciously shifting closer to his cot. The movement was small, instinctive, but it made Jake's breath catch. When had she started seeking his proximity even in sleep? Question 2. Have you maintained proper social connections? Jake continued reading. Well, that depends on how broadly we're defining social and proper. He closed the tablet without finishing the evaluation. Some questions were better left unanswered, especially when the answers might complicate the best thing to happen to him in months. Outside, Kepler 442c's dual moons were rising, their combined light turning the crystal formations into a natural cathedral of song. Jake listened to the harmonies, now recognizing patterns that Starweaver had taught him to hear. Music that told stories of ancient migrations, seasonal changes, and yes, recent arrivals that had disrupted traditional melodies with new harmonics. "We're probably changing more than just the air," he murmured to the sleeping figure beside him. "Question is, are we changing it for the better?" The crystals sang their complex song, and for once, Jake thought he understood at least part of the answer. Jake woke to the sound of crystal formation screaming. Not singing, screaming. The harmonious melodies that had become his evening soundtrack were replaced by discordant wails that made his teeth ache and his equipment throw error messages. "That's either very bad news or the universe's most aggressive wake-up call," he muttered, checking his chronometer. 3 hours before dawn, and Starweaver was sitting bolt upright beside his cot, her luminescent patterns flashing in rapid, anxious pulses. "They found me," she said simply. Jake's camp lighting activated automatically as multiple energy signatures appeared on his perimeter sensors. Tall figures emerged from the crystal groves, moving with predatory grace. Even in the dim light, their resemblance to Starweaver was obvious. Elongated ears, luminescent skin, and clothing that seemed woven from starlight itself. "Your welcoming committee?" Jake asked, reaching for his emergency beacon. "My cousin's enforcement squad," Starweaver replied, getting to her feet with obvious reluctance. "Led by my cousin himself, I suspect." Sure enough, the figure at the front of the group stepped into Jake's camp, lighting with the swagger of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. His luminescent patterns were more aggressive than Starweaver's, all sharp angles and harsh pulses that reminded Jake of warning signals. "Princess Starweaver," the newcomer said, his words coming through Jake's translator with aristocratic precision. "You will return to face judgment for contaminating our bloodline with surface dweller influence. Contaminating seems harsh, Jake interjected, standing and crossing his arms. We've mostly just been sharing coffee and discussing atmospheric chemistry. If that counts as contamination, half the universities in the galaxy are in trouble. The cousin's attention shifted to Jake with obvious disdain. You are the human responsible for corrupting our air. Jake Sullivan, professional terraformer and occasional corrupter of royalty, Jake replied with a slight bow. Though in my defense, she was already pretty corrupted when I found her. All that dangerous thinking about cooperation and progress. You mock what you do not understand, surface dweller. I mock what deserves mocking, underground dweller, Jake shot back. Like the idea that talking to someone different somehow makes you less yourself. Starweaver stepped between them before the tension could escalate further. Cousin Voidrender, you waste energy on threats. I will not return to face a judgment based on fear rather than wisdom. You will return, or we will drag you back in crystal bonds, Voidrender replied. The Council has decreed it. The Council, Jake said thoughtfully, being the same group that thought marrying your way into multiple royal houses was a sound political strategy. Several of the Luminari warriors made sounds that might have been surprised laughter, quickly stifled. Even Voidrender's patterns flickered with what looked like embarrassment. How do you? That information is not for surface dwellers. Your cousin has excellent storytelling skills, Jake explained. Really brought the whole political drama to life, especially the part about proposing to her sister. That was a diplomatic marriage arrangement. That was creepy even by medieval standards, Jake corrected. And I'm speaking as a member of the species that invented feudalism. Starweaver's patterns were brightening with what Jake had learned to recognize as barely contained amusement. Perhaps, cousin, you should explain to the Council how a human showed greater respect for our traditions than their chosen heir. I show respect by preserving our purity. You show fear by rejecting growth, Starweaver countered. Watch. She moved to Jake's atmospheric processor, placing her palm against its surface. The machine's mechanical humming shifted into something musical, harmonizing with the crystal formations around the camp. Then Jake activated his harmonic translation program, and suddenly the air filled with visible music, swirling patterns of light that danced between luminary crystal song and human technology. The effect on the warriors was immediate. Several stepped back in obvious awe, their patterns shifting from aggressive warnings to curious wonder. Impossible, Voidrender breathed. Inevitable, Starweaver corrected. Two peoples working together accomplish what neither could alone. This is what I tried to show the Council. Collaboration creates beauty, not contamination. The traditions forbid. The traditions, Jake interrupted, pulling up files on his tablet, are about to become irrelevant anyway. He'd been dreading this conversation for weeks, but current circumstances seemed to call for full disclosure. My geological surveys show that Kepler 442c's underground crystal network is destabilizing. Too much energy buildup from your cities, not enough surface venting. You've got maybe 5 years before major system failures start collapsing your tunnels. The silence that followed was broken only by the harmonized singing of crystals and machinery. You lie, Voidrender said finally, but his patterns betrayed uncertainty. I'm a terraformer. Lying about geological instability would be like a doctor lying about cancer, professionally pointless and ethically horrific. Jake gestured toward his equipment. Your people need to start transitioning to surface habitats, and humans need to learn how to work with living crystal networks instead of replacing them with mechanical systems. Surface life is death to Luminari, one of the warriors protested. Surface life is change, Starweaver countered, and change is growth. I have lived on the surface for months now, and I am stronger, not weaker. You have lived with one human in the wilderness, Voidrender pointed out, not among their cities, breathing their polluted air. Actually, Jake said, checking his atmospheric readings, Our air filtration systems work great with crystal enhancement. Starweaver's been helping me fine-tune them. We're getting better results than either technology could achieve alone. The demonstration continued for another hour, with Jake and Starweaver showing the assembled luminari how human engineering could work in harmony with crystal song technology. The warriors gradually shifted from hostility to fascination, asking questions about air filtration, power generation, and structural engineering. Voidrender, however, remained stubbornly skeptical until Jake made an observation that changed everything. "You know what's funny?" Jake said, watching the cousin's patterns flicker with barely controlled anger. "You're terrified that contact with humans will change your people, but you're not wrong. It will. Just like contact with your people is changing us. You admit to contamination. I admit to evolution." Jake gestured around his camp, where human technology and luminary crystal song had created something entirely new. 3 months ago, I was a lonely terraformer counting days until my contract ended. Now I'm part of something bigger, a collaboration that could revolutionize how both our species approach environmental engineering. And I, Starweaver added quietly, was an exiled princess hiding from change. Now I am a bridge between worlds, teaching and learning in equal measure. The crystal formations around them seemed to pulse with approval, their songs shifting into harmonies that spoke of new growth, successful adaptations, and futures built from the best of multiple worlds. "The Council will never accept this," Voidrender said, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "The Council will accept survival," Starweaver replied firmly. "When the underground cities begin to fail, they will need surface alternatives. When that time comes, I will be ready to help our people adapt, not as an exiled princess, but as someone who learned that wisdom comes from unexpected sources." Jake felt a familiar flutter in his chest as Starweaver spoke of future plans. Their evening routine had become so natural that he'd stopped thinking about his contract's end date, but time kept moving regardless of personal preferences. "Speaking of the future," he said carefully, "my replacement arrives in 6 months. Standard rotation policy." "But you will return?" Starweaver asked, and the hopeful note in her voice made Jake's decision for him. "Actually," he said, pulling up his personnel files, "I was thinking of requesting a permanent posting. Turns out I've developed a fondness for crystal song technology and interspecies collaboration." He met her gaze. "Plus, someone needs to keep working on that harmonic translation program." "And someone," Starweaver replied, her patterns brightening with unmistakable joy, "needs to teach luminary children about human engineering and the art of terrible coffee jokes." Voidrender looked between them with growing understanding. "You are claiming bond-right. We're claiming friendship that might become something more, given time and opportunity," Jake said. "Is that a problem for your traditions?" "Bond-right with surface dwellers has no precedent," Voidrender admitted. "Then we'll set one," Starweaver said simply. "The first of many precedents our peoples will need to establish together." As dawn broke over Kepler 442c, the assembled luminari began their journey back to the underground cities, not as captors returning with a prisoner, but as messengers carrying news of possibilities their people had never imagined. Starweaver remained behind, settling beside Jake's cot as the last of the warriors disappeared into the crystal groves. "So," Jake said, reactivating his atmospheric processor and watching it harmonize with the morning crystal songs, "ready for another day of corrupting galactic civilization." "Ready for another day of growth," Starweaver corrected, laughing, "though I suspect your coffee will accomplish both." Jake poured 2 cups of his terrible synthetic coffee, noting that even it seemed to taste better when shared with someone who understood that the best changes often began with the smallest gestures of kindness. Outside, the crystals sang of adaptation and evolution, their ancient songs now enhanced with harmonics that spoke of collaboration, understanding, and futures built by beings brave enough to sleep beside strangers and wake up as friends.